I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about one sort of use of language that's come up in a couple of the things I've seen on the discussion forum and elsewhere. Let me kind of start by putting it bluntly. In some important sense, there's no such thing as, quote, the economy. And in particular, that's the case when we use expressions like something's good for the economy, right? So in the discussion forum, questions about should households borrow more or should households borrow at all, right? A lot of you said, well, borrowing's good for the economy. Paying back interest to banks is good for the economy. All these things are good for the economy. The problem is that's a non-concept. There's no, in some sense, again, there's no such thing as the economy. What we ultimately care about is not the economy. What we care about is other people. We care about households. We care about firms, maybe, and we care about individuals. So what we care about is whether these things are good for them. So when we say things like it's good for the economy, that doesn't mean anything. Do we think that what matters is that we have higher GDP per capita or lower unemployment, that those things are themselves what matter? No, I think what we think matters is that people are better able to acquire goods that meet their preferences, are able to do so at lower cost, that people are becoming wealthier and are able to use that wealth in ways to enhance their lives. That's what we care about. We don't care about the economy as an abstract concept. We care about actual people being made better off. So couple things here. One, avoid that construction. Saying things like it's good for the economy just doesn't help us understand anything. The question is it good for people, right? So if households, as many of you said rightly, want to smooth consumption or have to finance large investments, borrowing is good for them. That's all that matters, right? I mean, it might add that it's good for banks and that banks get business and so on. That's good for banks and good for the individuals who work there and who perhaps own shares in the bank stock or something like that. That's fine, okay? And you can talk about the mutual benefit of exchange. Who benefits when people trade, including when they trade loanable funds? That's great. But sort of saying that to justify something by saying it's good for the economy, what does that even mean? Like, if you want to play this game, right, one of the things we talked about, imagine that we have a natural disaster like a hurricane or a flood or something that destroys a lot of infrastructure or seriously damages a major city. We spend money to rebuild it. GDP goes up. Oh, it's good for the economy. Well, it's not. The natural disaster, the hurricane, the flood wasn't good for the economy, right? People's lives were turned upside down. They'd had to use resources to get themselves back to where they were before. They're not any better off than they were before the disaster hit, right? And if you really believe that, wouldn't that justify sort of, riots in every city? Let's burn down all the cities and rebuild them. It'll be good for the economy, right? That's not how we approach these things, right? And then when you phrase it that way, it seems kind of silly, right? Again, what we care about are individuals, households, families, firms, right? We don't care about this abstraction that people call the economy. So when you're sort of thinking about these issues and you're talking about them, you want to avoid that. And one other small point, we'll talk about this perhaps a little bit more later. A couple of you sort of said how important it is spending is good for the economy, right? When consumers spend, that's good for the economy. Not necessarily, right? When we think about what causes economic growth, again, go back to the discussion in the last couple chapters in the book. What leads to economic growth? Notice consumption spending wasn't there at all, right? We talked about technology, we talked about institutions, right? We talked about the production side of things. How do we create stuff? Spending, consumption doesn't create wealth. In some sense, it destroys it because you're using it up, you're consuming it, right? So spending isn't what drives the economy, despite what you read in the media and despite what bad economic journalists say, right? What drives the economy, what creates economic growth is our ability to produce. Okay, so just a couple things to watch for as you're working with this material.